You're tuned in to the Generic Tech Bro podcast, where code, caffeine, and culture collide. Let's get into it.
Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Generic Tech Bro podcast. It's me, Cole, and today I'll be hosting Theo here, and a kind of special episode today because usually on this podcast we talk about the latest tech news and things that are going around the tech world at the moment, but today we'll be cutting in a little bit close to home because this is actually something that I've been working on personally through my job at Microsoft, and through the past few months of this project, I've been able to have some elements of the data side of the project as well as some of the climate elements of it as well, try to deal with some of the climate implications of what we are trying to do. And with that, I want to go a little bit deeper into the climate effects of this project that Microsoft has endeavored. And who better than to talk to Theo, one of the experts in the field, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, hello guys. I'm Theo. I'm Theo De Grass. I'm a climate scientist, and I'm going to be here today to analyze the past and future climate surrounding 3 Mile Island and how that could affect the entire climate and how climate can affect the 3 Mile Island.
All right. And just so we can move on, I have a little presentation today just to kind of guide us through this kind of conversation. Just to start, we'll be going over some of the mission statements that the business team at Microsoft has dealt towards this new project. As Theo has mentioned, it's the 3 Mile Island nuclear/data center project. We'll be looking into the deal itself with Constellation in depth, and also why climate is such an important factor in this kind of project that Microsoft wants to do for the future of AI. Additionally, we'll be going into something that Theo has added himself, was the modern climate analysis. Well, actually, the modern climate analysis is something that Microsoft did through its initial works, but through this podcast and additional research, we will be going over some of the paleoclimate and some of the broader context of what this project entails, as well as some of the future implications that we haven't gone through yet, but we should take into consideration down the road. And through this conversation, hopefully we could come up with some kind of verdict and some kind of path forward in the right direction in terms of climate.
For sure, yeah. I would love to get, see how we can impact people's understanding of what Microsoft's actually trying to do here.
Absolutely. And just to start, why bother with this 3 Mile Island thing? I mean, when people think of 3 Mile Island, they think of the nuclear disaster and all the nasty things that came from that. But what we realized through the years is that while there's a huge inherent risk that comes with nuclear power, there's really no cleaner and more efficient energy that's out there. And that's kind of the position that Microsoft and our partners at Constellation has come up with. And with that, we kind of want to, with this new AI world that we're getting into, which requires massive amounts of power, we want to find a solution to that power source through something that's carbon-free and less impactful to the environment in a negative way. And that's kind of why we got through this partnership in the first place. And just to get into the deal, particularly, so it started in 2024. That's when it got agreed upon between Microsoft and Constellation, which is one of the major national energy companies in the U.S. The goal was to just restart Unit 1, which is just half of what 3 Mile Island has, and it's the one that wasn't impacted by the nuclear meltdown in the 50 or so years ago. And we want to use this to not only power our AI development, which is going to have endless possibilities in the future, but also some of our cloud services and other services that Microsoft has to offer. So we have a 20-year power purchase agreement between us and Constellation to fund this kind of program and get the power plant back in running. And hopefully, by the end of it, we'll be able to generate around 830 megawatts of energy, which, just based off our estimates, is equivalent to empowering 800 homes. So we're talking about a significant source of energy here. And hopefully by 2028, we'll have this whole thing done. But of course, there are climate elements to this restart that would affect the local Harrisburg area. I don't know if you're familiar with any of that.
Yeah. I mean, there's some definitely effects. But we can get to that later. But Three Mile Island is located on the Susquehanna, and there has been some stigma in the past about how if they're releasing some toxic water into the environment and how maybe it could affect the fish. But we can get to that later.
Alrighty. And that kind of leads into what we want to talk about, why the climate matters. As part of my project and my contribution to this project, I was taking the lead on some of the climate research and how that would play into effect of where you place the data center, how the nuclear power plays a factor in the local ecosystem. And the reason why we need 3 Mile Island specifically and why it's located where it is we need the constant water flow to meet our cooling needs. And what better location would that be than right next to a river? But obviously, by relying on a river, there's multiple risk factors in relying on that kind of source of energy. One of which is related to the water source itself. With droughts, if there is a drought, there is a huge cooling problem that we have with our reactors and could spin off an issue that needs addressing immediately. As for floods, we don't want to overload the systems on the island itself and raise the possibility of meltdowns and having our energy source cut off from its most generous provider. And the question is, since the Susquehanna, as we'll get into, is very volatile in terms of how its flow and its water level progress throughout the year and throughout the year itself and between years, how would our 20-year investment fare, and would there be additional costs that we need to consider or risk factors that we need to look into? And that's just kind of the open question that I'm researching right now. So, as we stand now, this is kind of the initial climate analysis that we've done of the modern era right now. So just to get into it, 3 Mile Island, as we said, is around the Harrisburg area in Pennsylvania. We have kind of a humid continental kind of climate, which means that it's pretty very varied, the kind of climate that we're dealing with in this area. It can have a lot of precipitation, we can have little precipitation, and it kind of depends on the time of year and kind of other factors that play into it. I'm not necessarily the climate expert, but that's just kind of my understanding of it. And just through some of the data we collected, we, as of now, get around 45 inches of precipitation annually, as well as ranging in temperatures from 22 to 86 degrees Fahrenheit. And one of the things that the news has found and through our research is that the trend is that we are getting warmer and warmer, even among the cold state of Pennsylvania. And that plays a part in some of the droughts that we've been seeing and some of the floods we've been seeing as well. And 2024 actually was one of the warmest years in recorded history for PA. So we need to take into effect how that would affect our future plans with this data center and the nuclear power. You might be, I don't know if you're more familiar with the kind of the trends here.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to discuss into the past and the future, so we can see some predicaments that the power plant may have, and the data center may also have as well.
Perfect. Onto the Susquehanna itself. Obviously, it's one of the largest rivers in the United States, and it's actually the largest in the east coast of the United States, and provides cities such as Harrisburg with a source of water, as well as kind of Baltimore as well, not exactly, and also the Philly suburban area. But additionally, when the power plant is active, it was an essential cooling source of it. And while the power plant itself had a malfunction, and that's what caused the reactor, the high variability, as you can see on this graph, raises some concerns on if there was a extreme variability in the kind of flooding, which is more and more likely as climate change accelerates. Would we have a problem? Would we be at risk of a meltdown, which is something we don't want to raise for a second time in this area? And just based off of flood stages, which is the amount of variation on a fixed point in terms of water levels on a river, we're seeing around 3 to 12 in variation in feet for this river. And finally, some of the risk factors that we've been figuring out through trying to figure out how to do this on the Susquehanna River is that the Susquehanna itself is very prone to flooding, And one of the recorded highs, which happened during 2011 with the tropical storm, was around 42.66, which is very high, as you can see on some of the annual precipitation that is very significant on that year of 2011. And we've been seeing recently that we've been seeing a lot more precipitous years, if that's a word, with higher annual rainfalls that are breaking records in the area. And this obviously raises a threat because on one end, if we have too much water, it might overload the pumps and cause a meltdown. On the other end, if the variability swings the other direction and there's a drought, where are we going to find the water? What costs are associated with that? And is there a risk of a meltdown, which we don't want to do? And that's kind of where we're at right now in terms of climate research. And as myself, as representative of Microsoft, we want to figure out what more we could do to address some of the concerns and limit our climate impact for years to come. Because obviously with this power plant and nuclear power as a whole, we want to find carbon-free ways to reduce climate change. But obviously with starting up this project, there's obviously going to be immediate climate concerns that we need to address, which is why I want to talk to you today, Theo.
Yeah, no, you guys definitely brought up some good points. You guys did a lot of research, it seems like. You talked about a lot about your reasonings behind opening 3 Mile Island and some, climate predicaments, like whether there's going to be a flood or a drought. And I'll definitely answer some of those questions here today. But yes, I'm very glad that you guys at Microsoft have done this research so that I can help explain a little bit more in depth.
Awesome.
Yeah, so let's just first look at the past and see how Pennsylvania was like. So around 20,000 years ago, which was when the last glacial maximum was, Pennsylvania was kind of mostly under an ice sheet. Mostly northern Pennsylvania was roughly under like a mile thick of ice. And the average temperature was about 11 degrees Fahrenheit colder than today. So that's pretty cold. That ice sheet was just north of where the plant is today, and I can talk about a little bit more about that. So basically, that ice sheet helped create part of the Susquehanna River. It carved the Susquehanna Valley and the Susquehanna River through the meltwater pulse that, as glaciers retreated, this melting water kind of just rushed through and kind of carved out the way and the path into the Susquehanna River. There's some evidence of this. There's glacial potholes at Conewago Falls, and created by some of the violent vortexes from that. And there is some risk, as you said earlier. You guys were wondering about floods and droughts. Yes, the river is geologically young and it's prone to rapid rise and fall. So the flood risk isn't due to just weather alone, but it's about how the river is designed. When you go to look at Susquehanna, it's a pretty flat but very big river, right? So that alone can rise pretty quickly. All right, so we looked at the past there. So let's look at what potential future risks are for the data center and 3 Mile Island. So in the future, Pennsylvania and most of the world is predicted to warm. But Pennsylvania is predicted to warm by about 6 degrees or 5.9 degrees listed here by 2050. You can see the map. Here's some different predictions and scenarios. So we got different RCP scenarios, whether we are actually in a certain path, whether it's a more high carbon or low carbon emission path in the future. But no matter what direction we take, we're most likely going to increase in temperature. So we're going to have extreme heat days where we're going to have a lot of 90-degree Fahrenheit days, jumping from, the average like 5 degree per year increase to a historic 37 per year increase, which is going to be a lot. With the high heat, there's also be more rainfall. So we're predicted to have a more increased downfall by 8%. And there's going to be a lot more heavier downpour events. So as we say, like things that are dry get drier and things that are wet get wetter. And for Pennsylvania's case, we're going to be getting wetter.
All right. If you don't mind, I just have a quick question. So with the drier seasons that come with climate change and the future projections as you've shown, as well as some of the increases in volatility when it comes to precipitation, are these measures that we really have to deal with in our initial planning of the power plant and our design? And how how much did it affect our kind of decision making early on when it comes to developing this power plant?
Yes, so for 3 Mile Island, I believe there's one instance in the past where 3 Mile Island almost flooded. I believe it was around 1970. But you guys should definitely think about possible flooding concerns more than drought concerns. Definitely try to think about, what are some potential ways to mitigate against the flood. So like something like flood walls can help, or helping direct floodwaters if possible. So I'm not exactly an expert in building all those like civil engineering for flood wall construction, but I'm sure you guys can get someone else to talk about and have it be an expert at Microsoft to figure out what you guys need to put in place for that.
We kind of pegged that on the Constellation, like our partners, since they're more in tune with like climate and like energy infrastructure and actual hardware. So that's not something that we necessarily need to be planning out ourselves, but it's good to keep that in mind as we both work out this deal, our 20-year plan and all that.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so what are the trade-offs of nuclear power? So, as you mentioned before, nuclear power is carbon-free, right? So most of Pennsylvania runs on natural gas, and some of it is coal. And some other stuff like solar, wind, water. So, but most of Pennsylvania is run by natural gas. But 3 Mile Island is one of the very few nuclear power plants in Pennsylvania, and it does provide carbon-free power. So it won't stop when it stops, and it's pretty environmental friendly, given that you have all the safety procedures in place. The whole risk I mentioned before is that there is a flood potential here with 3 Mile Island, because Susquehanna is at one of the top tier flood risks in the future, and we're thinking about whether plant would survive the floods. As we mentioned before, possibly having some flood walls or somehow building something that helps direct the floods away. So yeah, as we mentioned here, some mitigation is flood hardening, thermal regulation, some drought protocols. We can see some possible drought areas, risk intervals there on the map, as you can see like what areas might be affected by the flood.
Okay. So would you say, like, you could be honest, even though I'm part of the project that's part of this, is this too much of an environmental concern to go through with it? And what would be your reasoning behind that?
It's tough to say. This nuclear power plant could definitely be used for something else, in my opinion. Rather than like a lot of data centers right now, they're taking energy from existing power grids, or transitioning to using more natural gas or coal, which creates even more CO2 emissions. And then even with power plants themselves, the hotter it gets, the more energy needs to cool. So it's a whole feedback loop where as the temperature increases throughout the years, the data centers will have to use more and more cooling, and that's a known feedback loop, especially with like air conditioning. Like this has been seen in places like China and Hong Kong, where on very hot summer days, the electricity runs really high. So, but yeah, that's the main concern for me.
That's a great point. I haven't even thought about that, and it's definitely something we have to consider going forward.
Yeah, for sure. And as for the nuclear power plant, reopening it, you might again. Yeah. So then, from that floods, it's potential that you can have a potential nuclear meltdown. We've seen this happen before in Japan when and during an earthquake, a big tsunami came over and flooded one of their power plants and caused one of their power plants to have one of the biggest nuclear disasters in history. So if there's a flood potential and you guys, or the company that is re-enabling this power plant doesn't take into account for potential floods in the future, you could have another scenario like that happening in the U.S., which is a very bad environmental disaster. So, in my opinion, it's hard to say. Depending on, it is good to reopen to, is better than opening a, natural gas plant. But you will have to take drastic safety measures to make sure that potential safety concerns won't happen, like a flood potentially causing a nuclear meltdown.
Mm-hmm. And I will say, like, from the Microsoft perspective, those are some measures that we're definitely taking, because when we initially went through this project, one of the top concerns that we got from public feedback and just our own analysis is that we have to do everything that we can to prevent any kind of meltdown. And obviously we started at the initial meltdown in however many years ago, to make sure that there are safeguards, to make sure that any kind of mechanical errors are able to be detected long in advance, and also have great auditing measures to make sure throughout the years that we maintain safety, integrity throughout our usage of the plant. And additionally, with some of the research that the climate project that I've been a part of has done, is collecting research on kind of environmental impacts that could really devastate a power plant such as ours. Because as we might have noted before, there has been plenty of hurricanes, tropical storms that have hit the area, and those kind of drastic and intense weather predicaments raise huge concerns. And one of the data points was actually that Japanese earthquake that you mentioned before and the subsequent tsunami. And we want to make sure that even in like the rarest of rare and like worst case scenario weather disasters that could affect the area, we have procedures to make sure that we don't have a meltdown. And we also figure out ways to work with the community around Harrisburg and the power plant itself to make sure that even if there is a like nuclear disaster or meltdown, even on a small scale, that we were able to evacuate the area, and also invest into the communities there too, to make sure that while we'll reduce as much risk as we can, there is always going to be a potential risk, and we should offer our contributions to make up for that kind of risk. And hopefully, with the data center, which will be not too far away, we'll also provide some form of employment as well, and some kind of financial backing to the community for offering their, offering their sacrifice in risk to make sure the level playing field is there for our kind of dealing with the community. But yeah, you raised some amazing points, and there's definitely things that I did not consider, and will definitely do so in the coming meetings with my work at Microsoft and all that. So I appreciate that for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So we're coming to the verdict. You heard my points, and I've heard some of your points, and I think, as I mentioned before, it's kind of a mixed bag. It's very hard to tell whether reopening this nuclear reactor is good or will be safe enough for hosting this Microsoft Center. As you said, you're working with the company that's reopening it and seeing, what they can do to, help mitigate those possible risks. But, I think, we'll have to wait and see what they do, and, see the potential outcomes and how it's being used, more specifically once it's built.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see that point completely. And just going back to what you were saying about kind of diversifying what the power plant is able to do and could do. Obviously, with how much power this thing generates, we have room to kind of explore different areas of powering. And obviously, when there's kind of downtime when it comes to our data center, we'll have extra power that we'll love to give to somebody that actually could benefit from it when it's not the data center. But one of the concerns and kind of what Microsoft is pushing right now from a headquarter, executive level, is the future of AI, as the world becomes more connected to that kind of new technology that's emerging. And despite what we will do with the extra power that we have, from what it seems like, we'll have boundless energy needs from our AI sector within our company. And all I'm trying to say is that we can't really make promises that it won't just be something that's AI powered, because with how our priorities are set at the upper levels, AI and finding energy for AI is kind of what this priority and the whole point of this kind of project. But hopefully, as software improves, and we'll see what happens with AI, because there is concerns that there's maybe too much hype associated with it, and some of the cost structures when it comes to building data centers and like switching out CPUs and there's many cost concerns and some things that don't make sense at the moment when it comes to building distribution data centers as they stand right now. But hopefully, like through dealing with Constellation, our partners, and as well as people like that work in the environmental space as such as yourself, will be able to find some kind of middle ground and make as many people benefit from what we're doing right now. Because a point that actually we've been running into is that while we will benefit greatly from it, like the community, like we're not going to be the only ones affected by this. Everyone around Harrisburg and surrounding communities will be affected and we have to meet in the middle somewhere. So that could be kind of like an open discussion about how we go about powering this and how we use the power plant itself.
Yeah, for sure. I'm kind of against having a lot of data centers, but I do recognize the usefulness of AI. I definitely do see the future involving a lot of AI, but I think that you gotta think about, again, as you mentioned before, the efficiency of how AI is used, right? Mm-hmm. Regulating how much those data centers are using, whether they are being efficient and how they're being used, right? Mm-hmm. I think I saw recently on the news about how people are more transitioning from like GPUs to TPUs and how maybe that's a more efficient form. So I think not only should Microsoft think about just what's being powered, but also how it's being used and how efficient the AI data center is running. I'm sure you guys are already thinking about that. So, but that's just some points that I think are very important in how I come to think of this.
Absolutely. Well, it looks like we're running out of time, but I just want to say thank you again, Theo, for coming in today. A lot of what you said, I will be talking to my project teammates as well. Try to work out some of the climate elements that we have not considered. And if you're interested, we could definitely get in contact with you to do more detailed and further talks about how we can improve the safety measures at Microsoft and with this power plant.
All right. Yeah, that sounds good.
All right. With that, thank you all for tuning in to Generic Tech Bro podcast. Feel free to get our merch. This is the Generic Tech Bro mason jar.
Yeah, this is a nice mason jar. It's pretty solid.
Yeah, very solid, very solid.
Is it very eco-friendly? How do you guys make this material?
We'll save that for another podcast. All right. Thank you, Theo, and thank you all for watching.